She froze, astonished to realize she had transmigrated into someone else's life. She tried to piece together how she might have died. Everything had ended so abruptly. She remembered being healthy and not overworking herself to the point of collapse. She was certain it wasn't one of those cliched, hit by a truck, transmigrations either. At last she concluded the only plausible explanation was that she had slipped into this body while in a deep sleep. Even though transmigration was fashionable, she felt it was unsettling and wrong to occupy someone at random. Ironically, she returned to consciousness just as the original owner's funeral was underway. She blushed with awkward embarrassment at coming back to life and watching everyone stare as if they were witnessing a ghost. Desperate to anchor herself, she blurted out and demanded the name of the person across from her. The following day priests and doctors grilled her incessantly until exhaustion frayed her mind. Drained, she decided to call it a medical miracle, and begged to be left alone. She wished she knew the original owner's temperament so she could navigate other people's expectations. Unlike the movies, none of the original owner's memories flooded into her mind. The martial arts novel she'd read before transmigrating offered no practical help now. She muttered that she had no choice but to fend for herself in this unfamiliar life. She decided to use amnesia as a convenient explanation for any odd behavior. Thankfully, one sympathetic maid agreed to help and supplied crucial information. She learned her name was Evangeline Rohanson but remained completely blank about her past. From the household's fearful expressions, she inferred she'd transmigrated into the role of a villainess. The servants quaked at her presence, a few even fainted from sheer terror. A young maid dropped to her knees, begging for mercy the moment she saw her before being hauled away. She surmised the original owner must have been cruel to inspire such fear and resolved to be kinder. Catching sight of herself in a mirror, she noticed her striking red eyes. In romance novels, red-eyed heroines are often cast as untamable and dangerous. That eye color typically marks someone as an ill omen, inviting scorn and mistreatment. She briefly fantasized about a handsome man calling her beautiful, then remembered Evangeline had clearly suffered severe abuse. Her father's absence, even after his supposedly dead daughter returned, proved the original owner was deeply despised. She clicked her tongue, realizing the family blamed the children for the mother's death and that her father had been cruel. She began asking about common archetypes, a fiancé, the crown prince, or a northern grand duke. The maid, frightened, replied that Evangeline had no fiancé. She learned the crown prince was actually an older uncle with 2 children. There was no grand duke or saintly figure in the picture. Realizing the maid couldn't offer more, she let the trembling woman retreat. She decided to search for a hidden diary that might reveal the original owner's secrets. To her dismay, she discovered she couldn't read the written language in this world, even though she spoke it fluently. The maid blushed with embarrassment and fretted over her mistress's strange conduct. The servant hurried off to fetch a primer so Evangeline wouldn't be offended by her ignorance. Watching the maids retreating back, she realized she had been left alone once more. She resolved to take advantage of the empty house and begin exploring. She prowled through every corner of Evangeline's room with careful, furtive scrutiny. She even overturned items in the bathroom, methodically checking every hidden spot. Her search quickly extended into the luxurious parlor, where she rifled through furnishings and drawers. Frustration flared as she failed to locate the elusive diary anywhere in the house. Then she recalled the maid's offhand mention of a secret room tucked away in the mansion. It was the one room Evangeline had strictly forbidden anyone to enter while alive. She hoped that behind that locked door she might finally find the crucial clue she desperately needed. The door to the secret room felt unnaturally heavy, jammed as if resisting entry. She gathered every ounce of strength and planted her feet, pushing with all her might. With a sudden groan the door yawned open, and she staggered, tumbling to the floor. Pain flared across her palms and knees. She berated herself for not fetching help instead of forcing it. As she lifted her head, a chill washed over her. Something in the room felt profoundly wrong. She stared in horror at the sight before her and knew, with a sick certainty, that she had found the answer. Peach petals drifted through the air, a soft, eerie reminder that a tragedy had once unfolded here. Evangeline Rohan's son, the family's only daughter, had truly died. Though the household officially blamed illness, the servants silently carried a darker truth. They could never erase the image of pale legs swinging from a cherry tree branch. That day the cherry blossoms had been an unnerving, blood-like red. The sweet scent of those flowers still clung to the memories of those who witnessed it. The funeral that followed was arranged in secret, quiet, rushed, and deliberately hidden. It was a modest affair, shrouded in a suffocating gloom rather than public grief. They cited a contagious illness as an excuse to ward off visiting nobles and curious sympathies. Despite the youth of the deceased, no one openly mourned and no genuine tears fell. A sudden, icy sensation settled over the funeral, tightening throats and freezing breath. From inside the sealed coffin came strange rustlings that set everyone on edge. In the hush of the ceremony those noises cut through sharply, silencing the congregation. It sounded like scraping in the old wood's slow, protesting creak, something clawing for escape. Whispers swelled into panicked murmurs as attendees realized an impossible scene was unfolding. The priest stood frozen, horror widening his eyes. He could scarcely accept what he heard. As the lid opened, a cascade of white hair poured out like a waterfall. The strands gleamed silky yet carried an uncanny, unsettling sheen. Blood-red eyes blinked open slowly, boring into the souls of everyone present. Those eyes sucked the air from the room. Anyone who met them felt an overwhelming terror. The priest murmured desperate prayers inwardly, but his supplications found no purchase. The once dead body began to move with stiff, robotic motions, as if relearning animation. It flexed its fingers and rotated its head clumsily, practicing the basic gestures of a living body. To onlookers it appeared foreign, an alien presence wrestling to master a borrowed shell. A hollow, melancholic voice issued from that body as it asked, almost plaintively, what its name was. Once it settled into the form, a slow, satisfied smile unfurled across its face. A hidden instruction revealed how to summon an ancient entity after wandering the world, an occult secret stitched into the past. From among the crimson roses a black cat with 3 eyes materialized, crying out in a hypnotic, otherworldly wail. Snapped back to the present, she still stood rooted before that gloomy, shuttered room. Shelves rose like dark sentinels to the ceiling, the space read like a long-abandoned study. Everything was draped in dusty cloths, as if someone had tried to conceal the room's contents and its secrets. She was convinced the hidden diary had to be stashed somewhere among those shadowed shelves. She began pulling volumes, ignoring grand titles and heaving aside bloated reference tomes. Her heart leaped and she gasped when her fingers brushed the object she had been hunting for. The notebook was stained with blotchy ink, a string of numbers scrawled across the cover suggested a ciphered lock. The book's grim appearance fit perfectly with the mansion's villainous aesthetic. She tucked it under her cloak, intent on guarding it until she could study it with a proper primer. A loose sheet fluttered free, tumbling to the floor. A magic circle and unfamiliar glyphs were drawn across it. She stared, stunned, at the summoning circle hidden inside a diary, an absurd, chilling discovery. She couldn't help smirking inwardly. The plot she'd landed in felt like an antiquated occult melodrama compared to modern transmigration tales. To survive in this uncanny fantasy world, she resolved to exploit every resource she could find. Spotting a pooled red liquid that looked disturbingly like blood, she decided to use it to redraw the summoning circle. Though brushes lay scattered nearby, she refused to touch any of them. She preferred the raw thrill of tracing the circle with her fingertip instead of a neat brushstroke. She steeled herself to perform the ritual, indifferent to whether a dragon or a spirit king might answer. With a jittering heart, she silently begged whatever might hear her to appear and seal a contract at once. A cold, pale moon wrapped the Rohan Sun mansion in oppressive silence. Count Rohan's son, face like stone, regarded the trembling maid with wary restraint. Daisy stood quaking, eyes clenched shut though she had committed no fault. The Count neither scolded nor punished her. Perhaps he recognized that Daisy had once been close to his late daughter, despite their difference in station. It was Daisy who had bravely volunteered to watch over the thing inhabiting the young lady's body. Whatever animated that vessel, the face and frame still matched his poor daughter's exactly. The Count folded his hands and asked carefully what it had been doing around the manor lately. Daisy hesitated, voice shaking, then began to recount every worrying detail. She explained that it used amnesia as a pretext to pry into all matters concerning Miss Evangeline, from family ties to age, daily habits, favorite foods, and brazenly wore the young lady's clothes whenever it left the house. It seemed obsessed with becoming the real Evangeline, imitating her down to small mannerisms. Yet Daisy insisted that no imitation could ever fully replicate the true young lady. Servants who witnessed it either fainted outright or were hauled away, wailing and terrified. It paid no regard to the staff's lives or feelings. Instead it stared at them with pure contempt, as if they were beneath notice, filthy worms. The real Miss Evangeline, Daisy remembered, had been frail and gentle, more likely to suffer illness than speak a harsh word. If the thing truly sought to pass as the young lady, it should not have regarded others with such disdain. Overcome, Daisy collapsed into loud, wrenching sobs at the center of the room. She hurriedly apologized for losing control. The Count answered in a soft, reassuring tone that it was all right. He urged her to steady herself and continue with the report. Daisy remembered that it had once claimed to be unable to read. She soon realized those words were a ruse meant to send her away. When Daisy came back, she found it calmly reading in a room that had been locked from the inside with no key. Torn between fear and curiosity, she edged closer to watch. It had dipped its fingertips in blood and was tracing strange characters and patterns on the floor. As it drew, it muttered in a low voice. The only word Daisy could make out was contract. Just as she leaned closer to catch more, she froze. And their eyes met by accident. That single moment encompassed everything Daisy later reported to her master. The Count turned the word contract over in his mind, fearing it signaled dark sorcery. He dreaded that the blood might summon yet another monster and felt raw grief at the idea his daughter had chosen death. Because she had been denied proper rites at the temple, he feared an evil spirit had seized the chance to possess her corpse. Alarmingly, even holy water seemed powerless to purge the malevolent presence. With few options left, the Count ordered Daisy to stay close and keep a vigilant eye on its behavior. Noticing Daisy had kept her eyes tightly shut throughout, the Count asked why she had done so. She trembled as she confessed she had been too terrified to look. She always felt watched by something unseen. Startled, the Count spun to scan the room for anything out of the ordinary. He found himself staring into 100 deep blue eyes glinting from the shadow. The scene blurred and reformed into a mist-shrouded space heavy with mystery. Evangeline, now inhabited by a new soul, materialized, eyes hazy and bewildered. Without warning, a strange three-eyed cat padded in and let out a bold, resonant meow. She froze, astonished to realize this odd creature had chosen her as its companion. She marveled at a world where even cats could be uncanny, yet this one lay obediently across the bed. Despite its strangeness, the cat was irresistibly cute, fluffy, warm, and welcoming of her touch. Seeing the tiny creature, she swallowed audibly, all softness and sudden fondness. She indulged herself, drawing it close and hugging it as if it were the most precious thing. She smothered it with kisses while the cat protested with feeble, protesting mews. They tumbled together on the bed. She laughed, delighted to play the devoted pet mother. Her reverie was broken by a knock. Someone announced it was time for her morning wash. She snapped into composure, ushered the servant in, and watched the cat skid away to hide. She noticed the servant was unfamiliar today, Daisy was not the one at the door. Thinking quickly, she planned to use the cat as an icebreaker and asked whether the household kept many cats. To her surprise, the servant replied coolly that all cats had been culled long ago. Her heart lurched. For a stunned beat she stood frozen with shock. The servant explained there had been a deadly epidemic traced to cats, and she inwardly cursed her luck. A cold realization hit: if anyone discovered her little cat, it would be condemned. When the creature mewed, the servant glanced suspiciously. She pretended not to notice. The servant still found the sound odd and broke into a sweat. The mew had been unnervingly close at her feet. She prayed silently for the cat to stay quiet, terrified that discovery would mean death for them both. Luck held, the servant left without searching, and she exhaled a shaky, grateful breath. Regret washed over her. She had adopted the creature impulsively and now trapped herself in a dangerous bind. Driving it away would be cruelty. The cat probably had no surviving family to care for it. She resolved to have a priest or physician examine it and petition the count for official permission to keep it. The butler returned to say the count was overwhelmed with matters and could not see her immediately. Remembering the count's bitter feelings toward his daughter, she begged the butler to relay her plea discreetly. The butler bowed. She awkwardly told him to lift his head. She meant no reprimand. Getting straight to the point, she asked only whether she might be permitted to keep the cat. The butler's surprise showed. She worried she had unknowingly breached a household taboo. After a pause he replied it should pose no formal problem, though his tone betrayed hesitation. The cat nonchalantly lapped at the small bowl of water the butler set down. The butler observed that as long as it drank holy water, the animal would be considered safe. She wondered silently, if holy water truly cured the epidemic, why had the cats been slaughtered years before? Satisfied, the butler excused himself and left the room. Just as she relaxed, a maid called her back with a hesitant tone. The maid lingered at the threshold, as if weighing whether to share something important. Fearing other servants might seize the cat, she suggested embroidering its name onto a collar for identification. The gesture moved her. She felt tears sting, convinced she'd found an unexpected ally. Her joy evaporated when she remembered she couldn't read or embroider, and the maid had already slipped away. A rising dread told her she might be quietly bullied, like the minor heroines in the novels she'd read. She slumped over the table and wept, desolate at feeling so helpless she couldn't even write the cat's name. The three-eyed cat simply watched her writhe in despair, unblinking as she confronted the brutal reality of inhabiting this body. A sliver of hopeful light suddenly streaked across the glittering, star-dusted sky. Without warning, she found she could read effortlessly, as if a new skill had been bestowed on her. She sprang up in joy, convinced her bitter sobbing had somehow summoned this unexpected gift. Eager and trembling, she set to embroidering her darling's name at once. The result, however, was a ruined mess. She slumped, crestfallen, at how meaningless the stitching looked. Even trying to mimic the previous owner's technique, her needlework remained awkward. She couldn't even tell what the letters were. She muttered about tossing it and starting over, while the cat fixed its intent gaze on the collar. To her astonishment, the cat brightened at the shabby collar, delighted as if it were a treasure. It stretched up eagerly, demanding she fasten the collar around its neck despite its flaws. She was so moved she nearly lost her mind with gratitude, crowning the cat an angel for tolerating her clumsy work. Denied pets in her previous life by harsh circumstances, she felt as if a long-deferred dream had finally come true. She crushed the cat to her chest, drinking in its warmth and steady beat. From that day forward she christened her imperious companion Pudding. In a shadowed corner, the new maid hissed her jealousy, murmuring that something precious was being squandered. Her eyes grew cold and hard with resentment. If she possessed that thing, her brother's fate would surely improve, she thought. A sinister voice slithered into her ear, asking if she desired to claim it. Its tone made her start. A shadowy figure flickered past the window, promising to reveal the means to fulfill her wish. The malignant whisper wove temptations around her, offering dangerous shortcuts cloaked as help. The scene dissolved into a gloomy grove where pale cherry petals drifted like falling snow. From the shadow, the maid watched Evangeline play at the window, her gaze cold, calculating, and edged with dark intent. Henna drew back the curtains and prepared to begin another day tending the young lady. Count Rohan's son, unnerved by the mansion's pervasive, watchful eyes, fled back to his country estate under cover of night. Maid Daisy followed suit. She refused all recommendations and entered a convent, seeking refuge and absolution. The house grew eerily vacant, with the count absent handling family matters. The butler took charge of daily affairs. His heaviest duty was guarding that thing that occupied Miss Evangeline's body. Henna was chosen and entrusted with this sensitive, perilous responsibility. Her role required her to meticulously report every movement and oddity of the vessel to the butler. Henna sat across from the butler in the dim room, preparing to deliver her observations. After Daisy's departure, Henna remained the only servant willing to serve the young lady. Because no one else would accept the post, the wages were raised dramatically. Desperate and poor, Henna took the hazardous job. Yet Henna grew uneasy. She kept hearing faint cat cries despite having assured the household they were all gone. The butler heard only an oppressive silence and feared another servant might soon succumb to madness. Seeing her strain, he kindly offered to write a recommendation should she feel unable to continue. Still, the plaintive cat cries tormented Henna, tightening her nerves even as the offer dangled before her. She refused to flee. Despite the fear, Henna vowed to stay and fulfill her duty. Her ears tuned only to the cat's distant wails, human voices blurred into silence, forcing her to read lips to follow conversations. The true reason Henna risked everything was that a young sibling at home depended on her care. To save her ailing brother, she would do anything, even bargain with demons. When the butler learned that thing wanted to keep a cat, he assigned Henna a special, urgent task. He handed her a vial of holy water and instructed, with strict emphasis, that she ensure the cat drank every drop. Henna studied the vial with a mix of calculation and barely contained anxiety. She thought, if she could secure that precious holy water for her family, her sister might finally be healed. A malevolent presence coalesced before her and hissed, "Do you truly covet that vial of holy water?" It tempted her with dark bargains, promising to reveal the means to her desire if she yielded to its commands. Henna's breath caught. This was no ordinary feline but a terrifying, otherworldly creature. She questioned whether this monstrosity was truly the animal Miss Evangeline insisted on keeping. Her first impulse was to run to the butler and report the spectacle for a reward. But the thought struck her cold. No reward could purchase the priceless vial of sanctified water. The image of her sick sibling, pale and waiting for a miracle, surged into Henna's mind. Her fingers curled into fists as she wavered, then steeled herself and made a desperate choice. For her sibling's sake, Henna resolved she would do anything, even betray the woman she served. Following the creature's instructions to the letter, she secretly swapped the real holy water for a counterfeit and fed the fake to the cat. To all appearances, Miss Evangeline showed no reaction, acting as though nothing had happened. Only Henna observed the subtle change. The true vial had a visible effect on the monstrous animal. She kept that discovery to herself and continued to obey the cat's strange demands without question. Perhaps because she complied, the phantom cries faded and the creature behaved politely in front of others. The perilous post paid handsomely, and Henna's income rose markedly while serving the young lady. With the extra earnings she could finally purchase nourishing food and medicine for her sibling. Yet money was not what filled her with relief. Her true joy came when her sibling recovered after receiving the stolen holy water. Henna rationalized that enduring a frightening mistress and a monstrous pet was a small debt for her sibling's life. Meanwhile Evangeline sat absorbed in bleak tomes, punctuating the silence with occasional, unnerving laughter. Now that she could read, she excitedly planned to scour her host's diary for a summoning ritual. She fantasized about calling a dragon or potent spirit to transform her into an unstoppable force in this world. Her enthusiasm drained when the book proved to be Evangeline's mother's diary from 2 decades earlier. The entries read like melodrama, describing how the Count declared his intentions in the year 370. It recounted how the mother had been confined by her own father, who feared the Count sought only to exploit their ducal lineage. In time she regretted defying her father. After he took her dowry, the couple's affection waned. Evangeline skimmed past the sappy parts, intent on locating the elusive summoning page. She froze when something utterly unexpected caught her eye among the pages. She lifted the scrap with a puzzled frown, curiosity sharpening into alarm. The arcane translation was smeared and corrupted, its symbols illegible and its meaning lost. Irritated by the incomplete script, she set the page aside with plans to return to it later. But the instant she looked away, the crucial sheet vanished as if plucked by invisible hands. Furious that the diary remained while the spell had been stolen, Evangeline suspected a thief had crept into her room. She pressed Henna hard. Had anyone entered her chamber the previous day? Henna recalled Donau's visit and admitted it was odd that he had disappeared by morning. When she learned who the brazen thief was, Evangeline's smile turned into a dangerous curve. She vowed to track him down and make the insolent brat pay for stealing from her. Night settled over the slums, a chorus of drunken curses and raucous demands for more ale filling the alleys. The patrolling knights grumbled non-stop about the misery of guarding such a decayed quarter. One sentry froze as a strange rumble announced a carriage barreling toward them. He gaped at the impossible sight, the Rohanson family's gilded carriage tearing through the filth of the slums. Within, Evangeline urged the coachman on, voice sharp with impatience. Her eyes burned with cold fury as she swore the thief would suffer for his insolence. The carriage ground to a halt before a ramshackle wooden house. Evangeline intended to reclaim her stolen page at any cost. She refused to let anyone rob her of the single opportunity to rise to true power in this world. With a thunderous kick, Evangeline smashed the door inward, barreling into the room to seize the thief. Earlier that night, Henna's little sister writhed in captivity, each moment a fresh agony. The child panicked, bewildered by how she had been dragged into such a terrifying, helpless predicament. Donau pressed on with the blood circle ritual, utterly unmoved by the girl's desperate pleas. Not long before, she had sat by the doorway, waiting calmly for her sister to return from work. She had only meant to feed the stray cat that often prowled their street a small scrap. Although warned not to wander at night, she told herself it was still early and stepped outside anyway. Without warning, a shadowed hand lunged out and seized the terrified girl. Donau subdued her with brutal efficiency and hauled her here, a savage grin splitting his face. He offered a casual, mocking apology for keeping her in such fear. Donau announced, with theatrical confidence, that the time had come for the sacrificial rite. He sneered that ordinary folk might call it superstition, but to him it was potent, practical magic. Madness glazed his eyes. He clung to his delusions as if they were gospel. He insisted Evangeline's return from suicide could only be the result of demonic interference. Smug and self-righteous, Donau claimed he alone had unearthed the truth about the demon summoner. He muttered that the Count had long milked his daughter's affliction to bleed money from her kin. Donau understood that if Evangeline truly perished, the family's vast fortune would vanish with her. From that realization he leapt to a conclusion: the Count must have bargained with infernal powers to keep her alive and the wealth intact. He spat curses at the Count, branding him a hypocrite driven solely by greed and prestige. He bragged that he discovered the sordid plot while rifling through the Count's office papers. He recalled nearly being beaten senseless for peeking at the ledgers that listed the obscene sums. Now a razor-sharp knife gleamed in his hand, its edge reflecting his cold intent. Ambition twisted him. Donau dreamed of rising to a nobility more feared and admired than Count Rohanson. He intoned wicked incantations, launching the blood sacrifice with feverish zeal. A ring of blood bloomed on the floor, crude and terrible, pulsing with a sinister geometry. Dana forced her into sobs, using her terror and pleas to fuel the ritual's potency. He barked at her to lie still while he drew fresh blood to sate the demon's demand. Cold as a surgeon, Dana nicked Kana's throat and dismissed her cries as nothing more than a minor wound. He paused only to find his place in the curse, lips moving as he hunted for the correct thread. Strange liturgies and perverse rites began to reverberate through the shadowed chamber. Dana cried out, heralding the arrival of an angel of light, amid a choking plume of black smoke. Suddenly a blinding flash detonated, sending both assailant and victim sprawling, stunned on the floor. Dana stared, frozen with terror, as phenomena beyond his comprehension unfolded. In the wreckage, a spectral, snow-white figure coalesced, haloed in dazzling light. A disembodied voice thundered for devotion while a single, fiery red eye scanned the room with clinical interest. Evangeline entered with formal bearing, magnificent and commanding as if a god had taken human shape. A fanfare of phantom trumpets echoed, announcing the arrival of something supreme and terrible. Evangeline inwardly grumbled that the door had slammed too loudly, blaming its rickety hinges for the disturbance. She snapped back to focus, recognizing an urgent crisis demanded her full attention. Stepping inside, she recoiled. The thief had escalated his crime into outright child abduction. Henna darted forward, crying out Kana's name, and Evangeline realized the two shared a bond. Furious that Dana had harmed the only friend she'd made, Evangeline swore he would not escape unpunished. She stepped between him and the girl. Dana trembled, whispering her name in shocked recognition. Seeing him tremble, Evangeline's lips curled in a cold sneer as she asked, "Did you just call my name?" She leaned in and accused him. Did he take pride in stealing her summoning circle? Dana stammered, asking if she truly claimed ownership. Noting his captivation, Evangeline confirmed bluntly that she had come here for that very reason. She feigned magnanimity, offering to hear any petition he had while inwardly listening for a weakness to exploit. Dana hesitated, the words jammed in his throat as fear and greed warred. The freckled man erupted with ecstatic greed, fantasizing about endless wealth and a life draped in silks. Evangeline suspected his motive was purely money, but she had no coin to offer. She clicked her tongue, decided to bluff, and proposed granting him the title of Count Rohan's son. Extending her hand with a convincing air, she promised to elevate him to that coveted seat of power. Dana froze at the audacity of the offer, his expression draining as the idea stunned him. As his silence lengthened, Evangeline grew wary. She vowed to free the hostage first and throw him in prison afterward if needed. At last Dana breathed the word "count" with longing and admitted he would welcome such a rise. He pictured replacing his former master, savoring the imagined prestige and power. A lecherous grin split his face as he decided to seal the bargain on the spot. In a frenzy, he lifted the knife toward Kana, intent on completing the blood-drenched ritual. Evangeline moved like lightning, unleashing a concussive strike that hurled Dana backward before he could strike. He slammed to the floor and the blade skittered from his fingers. Evangeline briefly regretted that the blow to his nape lacked cinematic finality. She almost wished she'd aimed for the throat. She watched warily for any sign of movement, only relaxing when he lay utterly still. Henna dashed to Kana's side while Evangeline allowed herself a small, satisfied smile at her lucky strike. Henna fumbled at the knots, whispering reassurances and begging her sister to hold on a little longer. Her hands shook uncontrollably and she broke into sobs as the ropes only tightened under her fumbling. Evangeline instructed Henna to step back. Panic would only make the knots worse, and took over. With one precise motion she snapped the ropes free and released Kana. The sisters clung to each other, Henna repeatedly checking for injuries as relief flooded them both. Henna scolded Kana tenderly for wandering out so soon after recovery. Kana mumbled an apologetic, embarrassed reply. Henna cradled her sore sister and blamed herself fiercely for allowing the danger. An overwhelming relief washed over her, she had reached her only family in time. Evangeline watched the reunion with an oddly warm flush, mildly embarrassed that such sentiment didn't fit her fearsome image. Practical as ever, she called Kana's name and began assessing the girl's condition instead of weeping. She turned back to Dano, considering whether to consign him to a lifetime in the dungeon. Or perhaps impose a harsher fate to ensure he paid dearly for his crimes. Her face drained when she noticed a fresh, bleeding wound at the girl's throat. Coldly, she asked Dano if his neck felt the same after daring to harm another. Kana forced a small smile and assured them she was all right, trying to soothe her sister's panic. Unseen, Dano slid a hand toward the fallen knife, plotting one last, desperate lunge. Henna screamed as he lunged from behind Evangeline in a sudden, reckless attack. Blood spattered across the room in a shocking arc, silencing everyone in an instant. Evangeline stood frozen, staring down at the fallen assailant as the scene registered. Dano lay crumpled within the very blood circle he had drawn, a fatal throat wound draining him slowly. Evangeline wondered if he had taken his own life to avoid punishment, then shrugged. Such an end was common for men like him. She told Henna he was dead, though privately she wished she'd had the chance to deliver true justice herself. Kana clasped her hands around the young woman's in gratitude, her eyes shining with adoration. Evangeline found the act of helping surprisingly satisfying, a quiet pride settling over her. Warmth spread through her chest, a flush rising, until Henna's anxious cry snapped her back to attention. The maid pointed toward the climbing flames and urged the young lady to flee at once. Panic hit Evangeline when she realized the shimmering she'd mistaken for aura was actual fire. She stood frozen, aghast at her catastrophic mistake as the room erupted around them. All three scrambled outside. Evangeline, still breathless, wondered why a blaze had ignited with no hearth to blame. Her mind snapped to Dano's summoning circle. Something had clearly gone horribly wrong. She suspected the servant had miscast her incantation, summoning a volatile fire spirit and surrendering her magic to another. She tasted bile as she remembered drawing the circle until her hands bled, all that pain seemingly wasted. She stared at the charred remains, mourning the likely loss of the spell scroll, now reduced to ash. Evangeline snorted at herself, briefly wondering if she should abandon her fantasy of becoming an all-powerful protagonist. Memories of damp walls, cold bowls of thin soup, and the hard palate rose in Kana's mind like a tide. A tiny window, no larger than 2 palms, was her sole link to the world beyond those walls. For years that small opening defined the cramped, suffocating universe she inhabited. Kana had been delicate from birth. Complications during her delivery had cost her mother her life. Her father, worn down by endless labor to pay for treatments, died young and exhausted. Afterward the family's burdens fell squarely on her elder sister, Henna, who worked without complaint. Despite all sacrifices, Kana's health never improved. Once she even urged Henna to give up trying. Still, beneath the fatigue, Kana clung stubbornly to a fragile will to live. Henna always named that stubborn spark with a single word, hope. Henna would point at the window and promise that one day Kana would walk freely like everyone else. Because of that promise, the tiny window became a precious portal of possibility for her. Kana would lose herself imagining she belonged to the changing scenes beyond the glass, finding small joys there. Then one day a stranger appeared at the window, a sleek black cat that watched her with inscrutable eyes. A small miracle arrived when Henna returned with a vial of holy water, claiming it as a gift from Miss Evangeline. Henna announced with trembling joy that Kana might no longer suffer as she had. Instead of relief, Kana's first reaction was a hot spike of anger. She resented that her father's and sister's sacrifices seemed repaid with a single vial handed down like charity. That vague bitterness sharpened toward Evangeline, whose benevolence felt faintly condescending. Then a turning moment altered everything and reframed Kana's feelings entirely. After that, Kana came to see Evangeline as a guardian angel who had given her salvation a second time. Back in the present, Evangeline hesitated, weighing how best to deal with Donau's fate. She knelt and, with a look that carried meaning, asked whether the cut at Kana's throat hurt badly. Kana managed a brave smile and insisted she was all right to soothe the room's tension. Surrounded by the ominous red eyes of fate, Donau chose to end his life rather than face judgment. Evangeline announced his death with icy composure while blood still stained the floor. Kana accepted the news quietly. For her, that finality was more than sufficient. They spoke of suicide as a grave sin, an unforgivable rejection of the life heaven had granted. According to their beliefs, such souls had but one destination, the darkest pits of hell. The savage flames seemed to rise in welcome as if greeting the sinner who had left life in lonely exile. Kana stood silent at the edge of the roaring inferno, a solitary shadow amid the blaze. The heat licking her skin felt oddly tender, like henna's arms or the gentle warmth of noon. From a distance, a cloaked figure watched the burning house, his expression calm and contemplative. He couldn't shake the question of how such an unnatural blaze had erupted in the heart of this ramshackle quarter. A growing mob gathered, pressing closer to gape at the horrible spectacle. Evangeline watched coolly as spectators multiplied, turning the disaster into a public spectacle. She barked a cold command for everyone to fall back, enforcing a careful perimeter from the flames. At that moment the knights arrived to restore order, urging the crowd to keep their distance as if they'd been alerted beforehand. Evangeline inwardly sneered at the knight's gaudy livery, the sort of flourish she associated with romance novels. One knight, however, shone brighter than the rest, his presence piercing and immaculate amid the soot and smoke. When he strode directly toward her, Evangeline flinched, instinct sparking as she weighed his purpose. A prick of unease grew within her. The scene was shifting into something more tangled and dangerous than she'd expected. Despite herself, she had to admit his beauty was dizzying, almost disorienting. His features could have conjured a skyful of imaginary romances in her mind, though none of them were real. He offered a courteous introduction, Gabriel, commander of the famed Paralos Knights. She couldn't help imagining him as the world's putative male lead. He outshone every other figure there. Gabriel asked gently why a noblewoman would be found wandering in such squalor. He stated bluntly that this district was hardly fit for a lady's unescorted presence. Evangeline chided herself inwardly. She was already playing the villainess, suspected at a glance. Henna and Kana stayed close behind her, silent and watchful as tension rose. Gabriel warned Kana that the area remained dangerous. Evangeline felt a flicker of pride when Kana stepped forward to defend her. Kana declared firmly she had not come for a stroll but to find a missing servant. She pointed casually at the burning house and stated that its master was the servant in question. She added grimly that although he remained inside, his fate was likely already sealed. Evangeline pronounced with frost that his death was deserved. People like him tightened the world's cruelty by living. Gabriel stared, taken aback by her hardness, then asked for a full explanation. Panic edged her voice. Who would accept the truth that the servant had summoned a fire spirit and then killed himself? Kana interrupted, accusing Donau aloud of having abducted her unlawfully. She recounted how Henna had begged Evangeline in desperation to come and rescue her. Seeing Gabriel nod with belief, Evangeline exhaled. This account sounded far more plausible and relieved the tension. Then a sudden realization cleaved through her, leaving her momentarily speechless. Her mind immediately began mapping Gabriel and Kana into familiar roles, the dark-haired male lead and the fiery, resilient heroine. She became certain, Kana, not anyone else, was the true heroine of this story. She realized, with a rueful twist, that she'd inadvertently stolen the hero rescues beauty moment from the destined pair. Her premature intervention had shattered the fated encounter that should have united Gabriel and Kana. Still, she comforted herself, she could not stand idly by while a life was at risk, even if it belonged to a fictional heroine. Kana's cool rebuff of Gabriel pricked Evangeline's sympathy for the handsome knight who'd been spurned. Embracing the role of the meddlesome villainess, she invited the sisters to seek refuge at the Rohan-sun house if trouble arose. Gabriel watched them leave in silence, puzzlement and curiosity tracing his features. At first glance he had mistaken her for a flawless sculpture rising from the crowd. In that grim slum, such a marble perfection seemed impossible, yet he still struggled to see her as merely human. The reason was simple: she radiated no ordinary warmth or trace of everyday life. When the red eyes of someone presumed dead turned toward him and spoke, genuine terror seized him. Gabriel stood dumbstruck, nearly speechless before that haunting, intoxicating presence. Beneath her composed exterior he sensed a being that regarded everyone below her as if they were ants. She displayed the faintest concern only for Kana, and the girls seemed oddly enthralled by this inhuman force. Kana's blind, fevered adoration made her resemble a zealot consumed by devotion. A nearby knight rushed over to brief the commander about the flame's abnormal behavior. The fire died out on its own, leaving the surrounding houses untouched while the one target burned to ruin. The knight implored Gabriel to follow him and see something even more grotesque with his own eyes. They found a charred body, naked and exposed amid the smoldering wreckage. Gabriel felt this was no mere accident. An unsettling premonition rose within him. From that vantage, the blackened remains resembled an angel, wings splayed in a grotesque, tragic arc. He was nothing more now than a husband living off his wife, desperate to produce a masterpiece to redeem his honor. Jim drifted from place to place, hunting the salvific inspiration his failing career craved. His worn feet carried him aimlessly, always searching for a true muse for his next work. On one of those wanderings he stumbled upon the uncanny flames burning with a sinister omen. At the fire's heart, blazing like a small sun, he thought he glimpsed a holy angel. When the inferno died, the truth remained, a solitary, charred skeleton among the ruins. Jim raced home and seized his brush with a crazed intensity, resentment etched across his face. He muttered of a sacred task delivered from those ashes, his voice thin with obsession. The compulsion to complete that angelic painting consumed his thoughts and hollowed his soul. But Jim soon understood ordinary pigments could never reproduce that eerie, otherworldly beauty. His eyes fixed on the mixing palette, which shimmered with a tempting, unnatural glow. The glint on the razor and the falling droplets of blood foretold a bloody rite about to begin. Stained in fresh blood, Jim hummed a warped tune as he used his own hemorrhage for pigments. Slowly the image of the angelic skeleton took shape, painted in the deep, terrifying red of human blood. Under the hazy moonlight the carriage creaked onward after a night heavy with dread. Henna asked timidly whether they should prepare a separate room for her sister at the Count's manor. Evangeline turned to Kana and offered to shelter her, since their burned home left them homeless. Henna meant to tell her sister to decline. She feared the lady's severity would bring more problems than relief. Donau's death and Kana's oddly satisfied expression continued to haunt Henna's thoughts. When Kana asked if her sister could stay, Evangeline agreed at once, without a moment's hesitation. Kana eagerly wanted to choose her own room, astonishing Henna at how quickly the two had bonded. Henna couldn't fathom how her shy sister had opened so rapidly to that intimidating young lady. Henna worried that if the butler saw Kana well again, her theft of the holy water would be exposed. Evangeline offered Kana the chamber directly beneath hers, a choice that made Henna gasp in alarm. It had once belonged to the late Countess. Evangeline reasoned that if it was empty, they might as well occupy it. Henna murmured she would inform the Count, though anxiety tightened her voice. She prayed silently that the butler would not uncover the truth before they were expelled from the manor. In the dark Kana whispered excitedly that she still heard the lady's footsteps on the upper floor. The girl reveled in the luxurious chamber and the wide bed that now belonged to her. Kana felt the lady's cat pudding appearing at their old home was a sign of fate binding them together. Henna, by contrast, shivered and privately suspected the cat was a perilous creature in disguise. In the dark, the two sisters clung to each other's hands, drawing comfort and warmth after a long, exhausting day. Kana thanked her sister with raw sincerity for pulling her back from the brink of death. At last she admitted she had been truly terrified, despite always trying to appear brave before Henna. Henna's guilt flared. She had misread Kana's oddness when it had only been a mask for fear. To Henna, Kana would forever be the little sister, lovable, fragile, and deserving of her fierce protection. Evangeline sat at her desk with a new objective: to win genuine friendship from the maid Henna. She replayed familiar isekai tales in her mind, where heroines tirelessly vie for the male lead's affection. Yet she felt no flutter for Gabriel, which made her wonder if she was a flawed heroine. Determined, Evangeline staked everything on supporting the true heroine. She vowed to shield Kana at any cost. To secure the plan, she needed a persuasive letter to the absent count to ensure Kana and Henna could occupy the room beneath hers. The butler explained the count was away on business. Although the chamber had been lit last night, its owner remained absent. Evangeline fretted that an ordinary plea would be coldly dismissed. The narrative made the count notoriously disdainful of his daughter. Then a daring idea flickered into her mind. She decided to rip a page from her mother's diary, a passage laced with bitter curses directed at the count. Neatly folded, she slipped the torn page into the envelope beside her carefully composed letter. The gambit worked. The count replied, granting her full authority and curtly ordering her never to write again. With that settled, Evangeline could comfortably keep the heroine and her companion close at hand. She began to imagine a slow, pampered life, days of ease and pleasure within the manor. The thought of escaping the villain role exhilarated her. She was eager to taste a fresh start. But Sir Gabriel arrived unexpectedly, his expression grave as he apologized before speaking. He delivered a chilling warning: she might be accused of having orchestrated Donau's death. Evangeline froze, baffled. Why would the plot suddenly twist in such a perilous direction? Earlier, Gabriel had sent a letter expressing his wish to visit her in person. Reading it, she realized he intended to raise a complication in Donau's case, despite the official statements already given. She suspected he'd uncovered an oddity while drafting his investigation report. Kana, meanwhile, felt irritated, convinced Gabriel was needlessly troubling her lady. Evangeline quietly resolved to play matchmaker between Gabriel and Kana, securing herself a place in their happy ending. She instructed Henna to prepare elegant stationery for their reply. Without delay she drafted and sent a response to Sir Gabriel. When they met, Gabriel greeted her with formal politeness and expressed relief at the reunion. Evangeline bluntly asked whether his visit was motivated by concern for Kana's condition. Gabriel replied that Kana did not appear severely hurt, his cool remark striking Evangeline as callous. Both she and Henna winced inwardly whenever they glanced at the scar on Kana's neck. Though she longed to use holy water to heal it, out of respect for Kana's wish to keep the mark, Evangeline wept in private. Gabriel cut to the chase. A new complication had arisen, and he needed her counsel. He looked unsettled as he prepared to disclose the unwelcome news. He reiterated the alarming possibility that she could be accused of engineering Donau's death. The unexpected accusation left Evangeline off balance and scrambling for a response. Gabriel then asked her to examine what he had brought to show her. Evangeline peered curiously, asking what he had prepared. She recoiled in disbelief when she saw the grotesque, baffling sketch on the paper. Silently, she judged the artist's skill as utterly abysmal. Gabriel admitted he had sketched it himself to clarify the situation and asked her to overlook its crude execution. Evangeline froze. She hadn't expected such a handsome man to possess drawing skills worse than a child's. She bluntly observed that, no matter how she squinted, the image looked more like a moth than anything else. Gabriel explained that Donau's corpse had been found in that same strange, contorted posture. Whispers spread among witnesses that Donau had been blessed by some divine power. Evangeline couldn't fathom why anyone would call a man like him blessed. He was the one who kidnapped Kana, and then died, apparently to escape the weight of his guilt. Then an artist reproduced that scene and donated the painting to the temple, which amplified public attention. The painting fueled rumors throughout the temple. Soon some devotees demanded reverence for his remains. As a result, church authorities ordered a thorough reinvestigation of the case. Their goal was to determine whether Donau's death had been misrepresented or wrongfully judged. The danger was clear: if Donau were declared blessed, Evangeline could be accused of fabricating his death. She felt the world was conspiring to shove her back into the villainous role she'd been trying to escape. Gabriel fixed her with a steady look and asked point-blank whether everything she had previously claimed was true. Evangeline realized that even the story's male lead doubted her. Altering her testimony now would only deepen suspicion. She recalled that most people here dismissed talk of spirits as superstition. Therefore she was certain no one would accept her claim that Donau had summoned a spirit. She turned the question back on Gabriel. Did he genuinely believe she was lying? Gabriel answered that he did not think Donau had been blessed, though he admitted the circumstances of the death were deeply odd. He made it plain that he intended to assist her. Evangeline pressed once more to confirm, and he gave a firm, reassuring affirmation. Gabriel hesitated, as if struggling to find words meant only for her ears. Noting his expression, Evangeline awkwardly suspected he might be embarrassed. From her habit of reading such tales, she recognized this as a classic sign the male lead had developed feelings for the villainess's ally. She inwardly regretted having underestimated the tropes of this isekai-turned-villainous plot. She found it absurd that someone would fall for a cardboard character while she, who was real, stood ignored. Evangeline insisted she had no interest in him and vowed to sever any bond between them. Gabriel replied calmly that her stance posed no problem. He said he was simply curious to learn who she truly was. Evangeline bristled at the unexpected cascade of romantic flourishes swirling around him. Returning to the matter at hand, she clarified that her pursuit of Donau wasn't motivated by Kana's abduction. She explained she had chased him because he stole her drawing. The circle in Gabriel's crude sketch was what had been taken. When Gabriel pressed for details, she told him it was a summoning circle. He followed up by asking what the circle summoned. Since people here revered gods more than spirits, she improvised that it was used to call down angels. Gabriel repeated his offer. He would help her investigate. A hush settled over them. The room seemed to hold its breath, all attention fixed on Evangeline's next move. Even the petals outside folded inward as if bracing against the stillness. For a moment the world narrowed to the steady thud of a single heartbeat. She stared at Gabriel and demanded, one last time, whether he truly meant to help. Evangeline projected an imposing aura, as if testing the limits of his resolve. She repeated, coolly and clearly, that she did not care for him. Gabriel conceded the point, comparing himself to someone who wouldn't even notice ants in the garden. He added that she deserved gratitude for sparing the weak rather than crushing them for sport. To her, crushing ants wasn't immoral. She felt indifferent to their lives and consequences. Evangeline's anger burned not at the creature but at the audacity of an intruder trespassing in her domain. Despite her frosty reception, Gabriel left quietly pleased. He had provoked a genuine reaction from her. He felt as if he'd witnessed a sudden blossom of color on an otherwise withered branch. Afterward, Gabriel stood with his men beneath the massive trunk of an ancient cherry tree. His comrades gaped in disbelief at the tree's colossal girth and soaring canopy. The tree's foliage seemed unnaturally dense, as if nourished by some uncanny source. For a heartbeat Gabriel thought he saw a figure suspended among the branches, but when he blinked it was gone. He wondered if the hanging silhouette had been nothing more than a trick of the drooping petals and dappled light. A single, gruesome image kept returning to him, a butterfly crushed beneath a carriage wheel. He pictured a close-up of the mangled insect, then himself in the carriage, face shadowed by deep concern. His features betrayed worry rather than the satisfaction some might have expected. The hallucination of Evangeline suspended from the tree looped in his thoughts, refusing to fade. He wondered if the vision stemmed from the testimony he'd heard before reaching the mansion. One priest, who had claimed to witness Evangeline's resurrection, had later taken his own life at the temple, despite no record of her funeral. The priest left no farewell note. Investigators found only evidence he had been quietly exploiting bereaved families for profit. A comrade reminded Gabriel of a scrap of paper recovered from the crime scene. The edge of the paper bore partially unburned lines praising the imminent descent of a light angel. Gabriel murmured the word angel, his brow folding as he considered its implications. He recalled Evangeline's casual claim that the circle was meant to summon angels. Once, rites to summon and grant wishes were common, until a brutal witch purge eradicated those who practiced them. As they rode, someone fell silent in memory, then suddenly called out Rafaela's name, the carriage filling with an odd hush. Their calm discussion of charms shattered when the coachman screamed that something had spooked the horses, and they bolted in alarm. The coachman planted his feet and hauled on the reins, wrestling the frantic team under control. The commander was shoved and tumbled, dazed, while his men scrambled to check that he wasn't injured. The pink-haired officer berated the coachman for his earlier boasts about horsemanship, leaving the man to bow and apologize profusely. The coachman explained a cat had darted out and spooked the horses, but what they saw was no ordinary cat, a three-eyed, grotesquely spotted beast staring at them. The pink-haired man waved the concern aside. None of his men were hurt, and he'd sooner endure a scare than let a creature be trampled. Afterward he complained to the commander that his heart had nearly leaped from his chest, but the commander only stared silently into the distance. The coachman spoke softly to the black horse, easing it back into a steady walk. Once order returned, the commander announced they could remount and continue. The pink-haired officer urged them to press on. Still, the commander couldn't shake the feeling that it was suspiciously coincidental the carriage nearly overturned just as they discussed charms. The scene shifts to a secluded abbey deep in the forest, its stones mossy and quiet. Nuns sweeping the cloister began to whisper, trading news of a famed holy portrait housed in the temple. One sister said the painting acted like a gatekeeper of faith. Some fainted on viewing it, claiming dreams of the sun god. They murmured that even Sir Michel from the Paralos party had been transfixed, unable to turn his gaze away. Rumor held that the high priest had lavishly rewarded the artist in gratitude, a generosity that left many astonished. Everyone wondered how breathtaking the painting must be to merit such praise, quietly yearning for a chance to see it themselves. At the edge of the group, a young nun named Daisy lingered, listening in silence to their excited chatter. Suddenly someone called Daisy's name, snapping her out of her reverie. When another sister asked where she was headed, Daisy replied she was going to see Father Berga. He had asked to speak with her. The other nun's face tightened with concern. She murmured that Daisy must be new and still naive about how things worked here. She warned sharply that Father Berga was a known predator who preyed on newcomers and urged Daisy to keep as far from him as possible. Daisy went icy pale, voice trembling as she thanked the sister for the warning. To avoid the lecherous priest, Daisy resolved to hide in the library and busy herself tidying shelves until morning, hoping no one would be sent to her room. In a surge of panic she recalled a harrowing scene, a woman named Evangeline narrowly escaping a monster that wore her face. She told herself firmly she would not invite any more trouble and must stay out of harm's way. The candle in her lantern guttered, its flame hissing softly in the oppressive silence of the library. Just as Daisy lifted the lantern to slip away, the door groaned open and a shadow filled the frame. Two clerics stepped into the doorway, leers creasing their faces as they called to her, "Sister." They pressed her with accusing tones, asking why she dared hide in the library when word had gone out that Father Berga summoned her. Ignoring the terror in her eyes, they hauled her to her feet and ordered her to come with them at once. As they led her along the corridor, the two whispered, speculating whether a brief meeting with the old priest would be enough to satisfy him. One insisted it would be easy. The old man had a weakness for young women, and Daisy realized in horror she had been lured. The priest hadn't called her at all. She screamed as they shoved her into a dim chamber, pain flaring as her shoulder struck the doorframe. They bolted the door and announced coldly that she would not leave until Father Berga's condition stabilized. Weak with fear, Daisy crumpled to the floor and could only moan, utterly helpless. In the gloom she watched the old priest muttering to himself about some hidden piece that had to be completed. He gripped a brush and sketched sigils with a manic precision, breath coming in ragged bursts. Madness warped his features as he repeated over and over that he must finish, now. Daisy's stomach turned, terror overwhelmed her as she recognized the abomination beginning to coalesce. A vast, writhing horror emerged, a monster sheathed in hundreds of green-blue eyes, each blinking independently. She could hardly believe what she saw and let out a raw, disbelieving cry. All escape attempts forgotten, Daisy understood with brutal clarity that she had to disrupt the summoning circle before it completed. The holy statue stood frozen, an impotent witness as darkness unfurled around it. Desperation lent her strength. Daisy seized a heavy candlestand and screamed that she would kill anyone who tried to stop her. A bone-deep thud rang out, followed by a sickening splash as blood spattered across the flagstones. Those in the corridor heard the commotion but exchanged guilty looks and urged each other to ignore it for their own safety. Daisy sat numb in the spreading blood, while the men outside smirked, savoring the horror they expected to arise from locking her with the priest. The chamber was a scene of carnage, dark stains soaked the floor, a grim testament to the night's violence. She trembled uncontrollably, stunned by what she had been forced to do, words failing her. Her eyes fixed on the blood-smeared magic circle at her feet as she struggled to comprehend the act she'd committed. She tried to tell herself it had been a desperate act to stop the ritual, but dread gnawed at her. What if the truth leaked out? Killing a priest was an unthinkable crime here, an offense graver than ordinary murder, against a man anointed by God. The image of the executioner's block flashed through her mind, a chilling reminder that exposure would mean certain death. She collapsed and wept bitterly, the walls of hope crumbling as she felt every escape route close. In utter despair she whispered a silent prayer, pleading that someone, anyone, would come to her aid. Suddenly long, inky strands dropped across her face. Daisy recoiled, throat tight as she asked what they were. She gasped as the darkness resolved into a wide maw, a bright red tongue curling from within, and cried out in shock. A shadowy, malformed entity leaned toward her and, in a voice like silk over gravel, offered assistance. Daisy's scream tore from her as she demanded, frantic, what kind of monstrosity it was. The thing motioned for silence, its gesture slow and deliberate. Stay quiet, stay still. Outside, the two clerics heard her cry and sneered, taunting Daisy that she had sworn she didn't want to be discovered. The shadow vowed to free Daisy if she swore silence, leaving her shaking and haunted by the question of who, or what, he truly was. Was he even human, she wondered, as he claimed to have tracked that thing, here yet curiously found only her. Desperate, Daisy flattered him, angling for mercy, and asked if he meant the many-eyed abomination she had witnessed. The horrific memory of the many-eyed creature flared in her mind, sharp and unrelenting. The shadow chuckled with dark delight and asked whether she could truly see it with her own eyes. He announced he had unfinished business with that monster and ordered Daisy to lead him there, leaving her tongue-tied and stunned. He reminded her coldly that she had no choice. After all, she was the one who had made the wish that summoned it. The entity sneered that his aid was already a favor, so it was only fair she guide him in return. The old priest's corpse sprawled on the floor, his face caked with blood and frozen in a grotesque expression. Daisy stared at the thing with loathing as it mocked the rotten corpse. She told herself only someone in her desperate state would bargain with a devil. The entity suddenly brightened, letting out an "oh," as if a small, important detail had surfaced in its mind. It mentioned, almost casually, that it had neglected the aftercare for the two men loitering outside the door. In Daisy's mind the image of the two clerics warped into hideous effigies crowned with flowers, grotesque and mocking. A cold, slicing sound cut through the chamber, a clean, dreadful swoosh in the dark. It was followed by the heavy clatter of something striking the floor and skittering across the stone. The entity remarked with faux innocence that it had accidentally dropped their heads while retrieving the flowers. With a casual tap it positioned the flower-crowned heads back onto the cleric's shoulders as if fixing a doll. They rose like puppets, throats slit in deep, blood-soaked gashes, eyes milky and vacant. Daisy trembled uncontrollably, rooted to the spot as the brutal tableau unfolded before her. Nausea washed over her, she could only make guttural sounds of horror and revulsion. The shadow laughed, arrogance ringing through its voice as the sound echoed around the chamber. It declared gleefully that it reveled in the outcome, everything had gone exactly as it desired. As dusk gathered, it pointed toward the distance and told Daisy that what she sought lay just over there. It inhaled sharply, detecting a familiar scent from that direction, and asked if he had truly taken up residence there. Daisy could only murmur an uncertain reply. Before it melted back into shadow, the entity warned her to summon it again only in dire need, and reminded her that next time the price would be fair and steep. Daisy stood motionless, sorrow and dread in her eyes, as the dark figure dissolved beneath a drift of falling cherry blossoms. An ancient, uncanny tree rose nearby, its blossoms never wilted since a young woman had hanged herself from its boughs long ago. The driver asked quietly where Daisy wanted him to take her, his voice steady despite the strange air. The carriage stood ready in the late afternoon, horses stamping, awaiting her instruction to depart. Daisy flinched as she noticed a deep, bloody gouge across the driver's neck, another soulless corpse in a living guise. She squeezed her lids shut, forcing herself to endure the brutal, unreal tableau unfolding around her. In a hushed voice she begged the driver to take her to the temple, pleading for sanctuary amid the chaos. Elsewhere, a white-haired girl snapped awake, blinking into the dim light and asking, in a daze. She discovered a large black wolf lying on the grass, gasping, its form strange enough that she couldn't immediately name what it was. The weakened wolf lifted its head, its yellow eyes glowed as it implored her to save its life. Startled to hear speech from the beast, the white-haired girl wondered aloud whether it might be a werewolf. In a shadowed chamber, a spotted creature lay motionless until footsteps echoed, heralding an approaching presence. A mysterious shadow materialized by the crimson window, sneering and questioning what the other intended to attempt in such a place. The shadow taunted the creature, mocking its pretense of loyalty and scoffing that it had sunk too low to be redeemed. The spotted being revealed itself as Fiauros, its true, terrifying form emerging, ringed by a halo of green-blue eyes. Without warning, a violent clash erupted between the shadow and the clawed monstrosity Fiauros. Back in the previous moment, the black wolf's rasping plea jolted her to the core, leaving her breathless and unsteady. She began to reason as if solving an equation, convincing herself that entails a talking wolf usually becomes a handsome werewolf. Her mind sketched Kana, the put-upon heroine, bruised by Evangeline, weeping alone in the garden before stumbling on an injured wolf. In that daydream the compassionate heroine would treat the creature as a helpless animal, tending it with gentle, lingering care. Then, as the trope promised, the wolf would change into a handsome young man, sparks would fly, and they'd live blissfully ever after. The thought of that romantic arc thrilled her so much she felt she could spin the scene into an entire novel. Her excitement stalled as a cold certainty crept in, something about the situation didn't add up. Panic flared, had she unwittingly usurped Kana's destined meeting with the male lead? Recognizing the implications, she resolved she must find Kana at once so Kana could perform the healing and preserve the story's course. But the wolf still lay there, whimpering and imploring her to help, and she couldn't bring herself to walk away. She fumbled an apology, admitting awkwardly that despite its pleadings she had no clue what to do. She protested her weakness, insisting she couldn't possibly lift such a large, wounded animal by herself. Suddenly a blinding flash swallowed her, and in an instant she found herself transported inside the nearby house. Standing in the room, she glared at the wolf and asked suspiciously if it had teleported them. The wolf beamed and nodded. She realized, with a mix of wonder and unease, that beast folk in this world possessed astonishing teleportation abilities. Moved by its desperate eyes, she postponed her search for Kana and resolved to stabilize the creature herself. She probed blindly for the wound beneath the thick fur but couldn't locate it, so she told the wolf to stay put while she figured out a plan. With a soft pop, the wolf condensed into a black-haired man, battered and bleeding, asking hoarsely if she could see him clearly now. Seeing the depth of his injuries, alarm surged. Ordinary bandages wouldn't suffice. She reached for the door to fetch a doctor. At that exact moment her cat, Pudding, trotted in, something clutched in his jaws, a small glass vial. Pudding mewed urgently and dropped the vial at her feet as if insisting she take it. Her breath hitched when she recognized the liquid, holy water, and she praised Pudding for his remarkable timing. She smoothed his fur and laughed, calling him the cleverest little cat she knew. For a split second she wondered, half joking, whether Pudding might actually be a beast folk disguised as a cat. She shook off the thought and forced herself to focus on the immediate emergency. Approaching the man curled against the wall, she crouched and asked gently why he was huddled in the corner. Assuming he was in severe pain, she offered the vial and urged him to drink, promising it would help. When he hesitated, she wondered if he had never tasted holy water and scolded him to stop being picky in his condition. Determined, she tipped the vial and tried to pour the holy water into his mouth herself, despite his coughing and gagging. She urged him to endure the bitter draught, unpleasant as it was. She believed it would accelerate his healing. While forcing the last drops down his throat, a sudden realization pricked her. She'd forgotten something crucial. She pressed him for his name. His face was streaked with holy water, but he remained stubbornly mute. She guessed he was a hunted beast folk, fearful of revealing his true name to a stranger who might betray him. She remembered the wolf's pink, innocent paw pads and an impulsive idea formed in her mind. Grinning, she declared she would call him Jelly from now on, a nickname that left him speechless and cheeks flushing with indignation. The man could only murmur that the name was an insult, a petty humiliation in his weakened state. The scene shifted to the Rohan-san mansion as evening descended, shadows filling the grand rooms. For the night staff, duty didn't truly end until the curtains were drawn and the mansion's lights dimmed to embers. Tonight Olive patrolled the fourth floor. Her co-workers assured her Miss Evangeline rarely left her chambers, but unease clung to her. Pained moans drifted down the corridor, making Olive's skin crawl. How anyone could ignore such sounds baffled her. Lantern in hand, she extinguished lamps as she went, each click of darkness magnifying the strange noises drawing nearer. Olive froze, stomach lurching, when she noticed fresh blood spattered across the floor just beneath her feet. She screamed and slipped, collapsing into a foul-smelling pool of blood that soaked her skirts. A hand clamped on her shoulder with iron firmness. A voice hissed in her ear to be extremely careful. The whisper warned that if she toppled backward she would tumble straight down the stairs into the darkness below. Olive's body trembled as the stranger urged her inside, stressing how dangerous the night had become. Still shaking, she could only stammer out a shaky agreement. She mumbled a grateful, breathless thanks to the red-haired woman standing quietly behind her. Back in the break room a co-worker snapped at her for returning late and reminded her she was the last to hand the lantern back. Olive protested in astonishment, insisting everyone had already gone to bed, though she couldn't shake that she'd just seen Kana. Her co-worker answered flatly that no one named Kana was on the night shift tonight. Olive blinked, bewildered, unable to reconcile what she had seen with her colleague's certainty. The chilling realization sank in. Some of the figures prowling the Rohan-san mansion after dark were not human at all. Worse, their dead giveaway was that they moved through the darkness without carrying lanterns.